The scene that day is pretty chaotic. Two parades collide, a parade of life and a parade of death. The parade of life includes Jesus and his disciples, high off the Sermon on the Plain and the healing of the centurion's slave. Jesus' followers are full of hope and optimism. People are beginning to talk about who this Jesus might be, and the enthusiasm is palpable. Meanwhile, another parade is underway. A widow has lost her only son. Widows were already at risk in that day due to their lack of financial stability and support from a husband. Having a child, especially a male child, provided a slight assurance that all hope was not lost. Not only would the son be able to provide for his widowed mother, he is also the legal heir of the father's inheritance. But when he too dies, not only does she mourn his loss, but her safety net is totally gone. She and the mourners with her wail their way to the burial. Two groups, full of noise and energy, but their energy could not be more different. Into this chaotic scene of wails and cheers, people struggling to carry the lifeless body of promise, and people struggling to lay claim on the messenger of hope. In that, something tremendous happens. The text says, "The Lord saw her." That simple phrase may not sound like much. The Lord saw her. But surrounded by a growing crowd of faithful, Jesus could have been distracted by the hype. On a long journey of travel, Jesus could have seen that coming commotion and steered another way. Or Jesus could have been deep in thought about his own journey. But in the middle of the chaos, as if in a movie that screeches into slow motion, the noise settles down, and Jesus' eyes lock on that grieving widow. Jesus sees her. On Memorial Day, my family and I went out for lunch. We were managing our own little bubble of chaos, multiple orders and hungry, cranky children, and the looming necessary nap time. As I stepped out of our little bubble to throw away a pile of trash, I noticed a veteran sitting by himself beside us. He was silently sitting with his meal, seemingly in a deep moment of quiet. Seeing him made me almost stumble into halted motion. I wondered what his story was. I wondered if he was remembering those who had died by his side while he fought for our country. I wondered if he was one of the veterans who managed to have re-entered after war relatively unscathed, or whether he was struggling to get by. I wondered if Memorial Day meant something different to him than Memorial Day meant to me. But my seeing him and wondering about him was not the same as what Jesus saw that day. You see, I was looking at him, but I was not seeing him. I couldn't even get up the nerve to talk to him that day. That is what is so profound about our story in the gospel lesson today. Jesus' ability to see this childless widow. We actually get two very similar stories about widows in our lessons today. But despite the similarities, the differences are more informative about what is powerful in Jesus' encounter. In the lesson from 1 Kings, the widow of Zarephath also loses her only son. Her son is also revived by Elijah, but the encounters that the widow have are very different. First, the encounter between the widow and Elijah is passionate. The widow in that story accuses Elijah of being the cause of her son's death. She is outraged, and Elijah panics, pleading with God to save the boy, especially after he has imposed upon them so much. But the widow in our gospel lesson and Jesus have no such encounter. The gospel widow does not speak. She does not plead her case with Jesus. She does not blame others around her, and truly does not speak at all during the story. Were it not for Jesus seeing her and stopping that procession, we can only presume this woman would have slipped into dangerous oblivion. Next, in the Elijah story, Elijah knows the son who dies. The three have already bonded over the miracle of food. So Elijah is intimately familiar with how precarious this family's situation is. But Jesus does not encounter the widow in his story until the son is already dead and being processed to be buried. Jesus' saving action then comes not from relationship, but from seeing the grave nature of the widow's story. No one introduces Jesus to the widow. No one whispers to Jesus that the grieving woman is a widow and a grieving mother. Jesus manages to see all the complexity in this woman's life in one glance. Final contrast to the Elijah story is the healing itself. Elijah has to stretch himself over the boy 3 times and cry out to the Lord for help to heal him. His healing requires great effort and exertion. Meanwhile, Jesus simply touches the funeral bier and commands the young man to rise. The immediate response of the young man sitting up and speaking demonstrates the extent of Jesus' power. Healing comes not from a request from God, but from Jesus himself. Jesus is not simply a prophet through whom God speaks. He is the long-awaited one to come, the Messiah. The differences between Elijah and Jesus teach us something about God. Jesus teaches us that God sees us when we are most vulnerable, without us ever having to speak or ask for help, and is actively compassionate towards us. Now, that reality may leave some of us wondering, well, why then doesn't Jesus see my suffering and offer me compassion? I wanted things to go differently, and they did not. That is why I find the words today so powerful. Jesus sees her. I don't think the story of the widow today is a story about how Jesus rescues us from our deepest pain and suffering. This story is about how Jesus sees us when we are suffering and invites us into similar vision. We may wish for signs and wonders, for the parting of the seas, or for the lightning bolt of Damascus Road conversion. We risk, though, then missing the miracle of the mundane. We miss seeing our friends and family who show up when we need them, the ones who have known us all along. Like those friends of the paralytic who lowered their paralyzed friend down to Jesus, or that widow who helped Elijah when he was hungry. These ordinary, unsung, obscure people do their parts to get us where we need to go, within earshot and arm's reach of healing. The earthbound, everyday miracle of forbearance and forgiveness. The help in dark times to light the way. The ones who show up when there is trouble to save us from our hobbled, heart-wrecked selves. Today's lessons about healing are not meant to make us question why we cannot receive similar healing. Today's lessons encourage us to see God in all the tiny miracles around us every day, the miracles that come in less dazzling form, to see as Jesus sees. When we attempt to see with the eyes of Jesus, something shifts for us. What is so powerful about seeing as Jesus sees is that Jesus does not see without action. When Jesus sees, he also acts. Once we've honed our better sense of vision, Jesus' invitation is not just to see with the eyes of compassion, but to use those compassionate eyes for the service of God. I have already begun to see the ways that Hickory Neck is a place where people have that kind of active vision. You already see the homeless man who does not simply need food and money. You throw in a pair of socks because you know how hard life is without the decency of clean socks. You already see the indignity of prison and how a homemade cookie, while seemingly trivial, provides the miraculous glimpse into the tender care of Christ. You already see how unexpected medical costs can push a struggling family over the edge, and how free, compassionate, quality health care gives more dignity than we can imagine. That is our invitation today, to see the mundane miracles around us every day, and to be reinvigorated to see as Jesus sees, with the eyes of compassion and insight that offer tangible, sometimes small acts of compassion to our brothers and sisters who struggle. My guess is that when we offer that compassion to others, we will see more clearly how we receive that same compassion from Christ every day in small, mundane, and yet profound ways.